Hello, everyone. Just going to keep admitting a few people, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We are recording today's meeting, so please keep that in mind with your Q&A. And we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Cory Kelly, one of the program officers here at the NIH's National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. And along with my colleague and co-lead, Karen David, we administer the NINDS Combine program, which you'll hear more about from Karen today. As a part of the Combine program, the NIH NINDS Team Science Seminar seeks to facilitate knowledge generation and translation through a dialogical approach to projects, methods, and perspectives at the intersection of biomedical and team science. So we thank all of you for participating in our second seminar of 2024, where we're going to discuss convergence research in complex science. And we thank you for being a part of our growing community of practice towards using team science towards achieving transformative goals. Along with other Combine-related events, you can view our seminar from earlier this year that focused on translating team science theory to practice on our Combine webpage on the NINDS website or on the NINDS YouTube. We'll also upload the recording of this event today to those same locations, and we'll send an email out to all the registrants once the recording is published and available for viewing. Our next NIH NINDS Team Science Seminar series will be held this spring, and we'll focus on evaluation of team science programs with considerations for individuals, teams, institutions, and funders. So stay tuned, and we'll be doing some outreach for that starting at the beginning of next year. Today, we're very excited to have a very diverse panel to discuss their own unique perspectives and expertise towards convergence research. First, my colleague Karen David will discuss how NIH and NINDS and the Combine program seeks to support convergence research and transformative team science. Followed will be our guest speakers, Doctors Bruce Weinberg, Alexander Peterson, Sabrina Figueredo, and Kelvin Quinones Laracuente. We'll have the speakers introduce themselves a bit more during their talk. Each speaker will have about 20 minutes, and at the end of today's event, we'll have approximately 30 minutes for a moderated discussion with all the panelists as time permits. So please feel free to ask questions or provide your thoughts using the Teams Q&A chat function that's should be at the top of your screen. If time allows, the speakers can answer your questions at the end of their presentation, or we can try to get them to the moderated discussion. If not, we'll try to just reply to them directly in the Q&A chat. So now for today's topic, convergence research. The scientific enterprise is always evolving, from its early origins and patronage to the current model, intertwining efforts between academia, industry, government, and the public. And over time, there's been an increasing need for collaboration to achieve ambitious goals that no individual or parallel effort could achieve. But as the problems we want to solve and the systems they exist in become increasingly complex, so too do the teams and the dynamics of collaboration. It's not just enough to have the right people in the right room. High-performing teams need to facilitate intentional interactions, create shared vision, co-produce knowledge, and align these efforts into transformative goals in order to achieve meaningful change. Driven by the need for this cross-disciplinary collaboration, the concept of team science emerged. The National Science Foundation defines team science as a collaborative effort to address a scientific challenge that leverages the strengths and expertise of professionals trained in different fields. And a field emerged to study team science, known as the science of team science, which provides evidence-based approaches to facilitate meaningful interactions and to achieve goals that could not be achieved by any one individual. And the science of team science is particularly applicable in biomedical research, where not only is the construct of health itself dynamic and ever-changing, but the scientific enterprise is always adapting, evolving a complex adaptive system with fluid behaviors and boundaries, making alignment between research design, implementation, and evaluation even more challenging. As such, some problems are so grand and so complex, a deep and purposeful level of integration across a broad range of often previously disparate disciplines is required to address these compelling needs and achieve these transformative goals. And those are the types of problems that today's topic, convergence research, seeks to address. The National Research Council defines convergence research as the coming together of insights and approaches from originally distinct fields to strategically address grand challenges. The National Science Foundation describes convergence research as a means of solving vexing research problems, especially those focusing on societal needs. And then that convergence research has two primary characteristics. It's driven by a specific and compelling problem, whether that problem arises from deep scientific questions or pressing societal needs, and it shows deep integration across disciplines. Convergence research intentionally brings together intellectually diverse researchers to develop effective ways of communicating across disciplines. So for today's Team Science seminar, we've brought everyone together to discuss approaches, challenges, and solutions to conducting and studying convergence research as we continue to build a community of practice around using team science to achieve transformative goals. And now we'll hear from my colleague and co-lead, Karen David, about how we are moving team science and convergence research from theory to practice with the Combine program at NINDS. Karen?
You able to see my slides? Great.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Cory. I'm Karen David, Program Director for NINDS and the BRAIN Initiative. And in this role, together with my colleague, Cory Kelly, we've been thinking about how we can best set up our teams for success. So for today, I'm going to walk you through the thinking behind the program design for our NINDS Team Science program, the Combined program, which stands for Collaborative Opportunities for Multidisciplinary, Bold, and Innovative Neuroscience. And one challenge that we see often in team efforts is the challenge of deep integration, that of convergence, as been described by Cory. And toward this challenge, our approach has been to compare models of funding for team science, choose the features that will best enable the teams to combine their efforts, and put in place activities and plans to safeguard against team science challenges. And what we found at NINDS is that the structure itself of the grant application influences how the team functions. So as a background, here is a very broad and general way of describing how NIH supports team science. So in the parent R01, which is the main source of support for the majority of RPIs, this type of funding supports one project, and the project is divided up into multiple specific aims. We also have team programs that are multiple components, meaning that it's made up of multiple projects, each with its own aims, and supported by multiple cores. What we've seen in these types of structure is the difficulty of actually integrating efforts across the labs and the PIs. That what often happens is that we get parallel efforts across the PIs, the projects, and even across the specific aims. So here's the visualization comparing these different mechanisms and the likelihood of integration across team efforts and pieces. So for a multiple component program, for example, a PO1, what often results is a collection of efforts across multiple PIs rather than true convergence. As for the R01, reviewers discourage interdependence across aims, so integration across these pieces is also not built in there by design. So for the RM1 combined program, we decided to focus on one goal, where multiple aims are not responsive. The teams can structure their complex project in whichever way they see fit, as long as the pieces proposed are essential, interdependent, and integrated. So what do I mean by this? We require that the team effort is unified by a single focused goal, because this common goal overall is the master glue that is bringing all of these pieces together. And what we want is a truly integrated effort, such that all contributions and pieces are essential to the goal. We encourage applicants to apply the deletion test, meaning if you remove a piece that is essential, the whole goal or the whole house falls apart. We also ask for plans outlining substantial and integrated contributions across the PIs, and that the project is not made up of a collection of individual or series of efforts or interrelated and parallel projects. And lastly, we also recommend to the PIs that they are intentional about integration, that they explicitly describe how they intend to glue these pieces together. And this could be through experiments, activities, planned outcomes, shared mentorship, unifying frameworks that act as glues that is serving to integrate and combine efforts across the disciplines and team members. So in summary, in designing this program, we anticipate challenges that we often see in team science efforts, for example, that of integration. And we also put in other things in place that I'm not going to talk about, such as a team management plan and the plan for enhancing diverse perspectives. And for more information, we highly recommend checking out our website or sending us an email to learn more about this. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you,
Back to you,
Karen.
Cory.
Appreciate it. Like Karen mentioned, if you want to hear more about the Combine program, you can just visit the NINDS website, and we've put a lot of information in some of the projects we funded there. Okay, next up we have Dr. Bruce Weinberg, who will be talking about career impediments to interdisciplinary biomedical research. Thank you, Bruce.
Great.
Oops.
No,
We'll
thank
see.
you. Are you saying it? Okay. Thank you, Cory, Karen. I'm excited to be here and talk to you about career impediments to interdisciplinary biomedical research. You can see I have a bunch of collaborators on this project. There's an NSF EHR/EDU funded component and an NCATS funded component at NIH. And I sort of, my tentative working title for this project was filling the gaps or falling through the cracks. Are interdisciplinary researchers, sort of filling the gaps in our knowledge, or are they falling through the cracks in the system, the scientific system? So maybe I can start with sort of there's a lot of interest in interdisciplinary research. I think there's this sense that it's essential for solving society's grand social challenges in biomedicine, but also, climate change and, just across the board, a critical component to answering our problems. And the sense that we're not producing enough interdisciplinary researchers. And so as a labor economist, when I hear, what all of that sounds like to me is that the supply of interdisciplinary researchers isn't large enough, which means that they should be having really strong career outcomes. And so, I'll show you a bunch of these things, but that's not what we found. It's not what other people have found. We have found that interdisciplinary researchers have lower earnings. This is right after graduate school, completing graduate school. They're more likely to wind up in postdocs and have shorter publishing careers. And so, this leads me again, sort of putting my labor economics hat on to wonder, well, if the career outcomes aren't as strong, is it the case that maybe interdisciplinary research isn't as important as we have been told that it is? And I think in doing this research, and I'll try to show you various components of this today, we've come to the conclusion that interdisciplinary research is critical, but that interdisciplinarians tend to be falling through disciplinary cracks in what economists would think of as a market failure. We're focusing primarily on the early stages of the career because obviously they're particularly critical, and so we're going to be studying here the career impediments to interdisciplinary research, to some extent in biomedicine, to some extent more broadly. So let me just walk through some of the various things that we've done. So this is plotting earnings right after expected earnings, right after completion of PhDs for graduate students from the survey of earned doctorate. And if you look at the disciplinary researchers in yellow, labeled monodisciplinarians, they have the highest earnings of everyone. If you look at what we refer to as global interdisciplinary researchers, these are interdisciplinary researchers who are combining very, very different fields. So, a medical field and a social science, or, an engineering field. They do quite well, not quite as well as the monodisciplinarians, but quite well. But people who are local interdisciplinarians in this periwinkle color at the bottom are earning about, excuse me, about 10% less than the monodisciplinarians, and quite consistently. And so these are the people who are combining different fields, but not really radically different fields, but different fields nonetheless, and they're experiencing a real penalty. If you look at the probability of where people are getting jobs, and maybe you compare the disciplinarians, the monodisciplinarians, to the general interdisciplinarians, you see that general interdisciplinarians are more likely to take postdocs. They're less likely to get what are essentially faculty jobs, and they're less likely to get jobs in industry. And then if you again split things between local interdisciplinarians and global interdisciplinarians, basically it's the local interdisciplinarians, the people who are interdisciplinary but not really radically interdisciplinary, that are most likely to wind up in postdocs, less likely to be in faculty or industry positions. And the very broadly interdisciplinary people, they actually look much closer to the disciplinary researchers. So just some evidence that the interdisciplinary researchers, and that was across fields in the survey of earned doctorate, seem to have worse outcomes. What I want to focus on primarily today is this article that we published earlier this year in the PNAS. This is joint with Enrico Burkus, Monica Mari, and Stasha Milojevic. And so in this paper, we show that that interdisciplinary research appears to be quite important. I'm not going to present those results today. I'm hoping that for this audience that won't be necessary. That people who are interdisciplinary at the outset of their careers tend to have shorter publication careers. And that the reason that interdisciplinary research has grown over time, and we do show that it has grown over time, is because researchers who were initially disciplinary shift into doing more interdisciplinary research as their careers progress. And we have results that I'm not going to show you today that suggest that that's a fairly inefficient way of increasing interdisciplinary research, to have people who are trained in disciplinary work doing interdisciplinary work. Okay, so let's start out and show you this point about shorter publication careers for interdisciplinary researchers. So what we're plotting here is the length of time since someone's received their degree, and then on the y-axis, the survival rate, the probability that that person is continuing to publish. And in saying this, I want to be quite clear. Obviously, there are plenty of really valuable things that people can be doing that don't involve publishing. But they're just, and so I want to acknowledge that, but unfortunately, that's not in the data that we have. But the thing that's really, you can see here is that for all of the groups that we're studying across the disciplinary interdisciplinarity spectrum, the probability of survival declines as you move further out in the career. That's obviously by construction. But what's striking is that if you look at the most interdisciplinary researchers, the top 1% of interdisciplinary researchers, or the next 9 percentiles in the rankings of interdisciplinary researchers, their survival rate is lower than the survival rate of basically all the other groups that we're investigating. And to just sort of put some numbers on it, if you look at the half-life of an interdisciplinary researcher, it's about 7 or 8 years until half of the interdisciplinary researchers stop publishing. And if you track that out here to these to the green and red groups that are sort of in the middle of the disciplinary interdisciplinarity spectrum, the half-life is double that for the most interdisciplinary researchers. So you're really seeing that interdisciplinary researchers are stopping publishing much sooner in their careers. Again, they may be doing very important other things, but in this measure, they're less likely to continue producing. A second thing that I want to show you is the trajectories of the level of interdisciplinarity that people are engaging in their research. So what we have here is we're plotting the length of time since people received their degrees, and we're plotting how interdisciplinary their research is. And in blue, up at the top, we have people whose research was initially above the median in terms of their interdisciplinarity. And you see that their work becomes more disciplinary quite quickly, and then sort of gradually becomes somewhat more disciplinary as their careers progress. And, for those who are like me and think about regression to the mean, we've done a bunch of things to sort of try to account for that in doing these things. If you look at the people who are initially disciplinary, okay, these are the people who are below the median in terms of their initial interdisciplinarity, you see that they become much more interdisciplinary over their careers. Obviously, they start out less disciplinary, that's by construction, and less interdisciplinary by construction, and then they become more interdisciplinary over their careers. And so we don't have evidence specifically to point to this, but the logic that we have in our heads is that interdisciplinary researchers sort of start out, discover relatively quickly impediments to interdisciplinary research, and then become more disciplinary. And that interdisciplinary researchers are, over time, and especially as they get past some of the career milestones, are realizing the value of interdisciplinary research and have more freedom to conduct interdisciplinary research, and their research is becoming more interdisciplinary as they move through their careers. And I'll also note that the initially disciplinary researchers shift towards interdisciplinary research substantially more than the interdisciplinary researchers shift away from it. So the last thing that I want to do, and I want to spend a few minutes on this, is to think about the change in the amount of interdisciplinary research that's occurring. And I'll show you on the next slide that the amount of interdisciplinary research has increased over time, if you take like a 40-year perspective on it. And I want to understand how that's happening, especially given that interdisciplinary researchers are more, have shorter publication careers, and shift towards more disciplinary research at the beginning of their careers. And in thinking about this, we want to think about this as like a stock and flow process. It may be useful to think about sort of the analogy of the temperature of water in the tub, right? So if you associate a hot tub that's with hot water as highly interdisciplinary, our question is sort of like, how can we raise the temperature of the water in the tub? We have four groups that we can think about. We have sort of the flow of people into the tub, the people who are entering the tub, and maybe those people could be more interdisciplinary than the people who are in the tub already. We have people who are leaving the tub, the exiters, and we might think of those people as being, less interdisciplinary, more disciplinary than the people than the average person in the tub. We have, this is sort of maybe hard to think about in terms of the tub analogy, but we have people in terms of publishing, in terms of people who published just one time. This turns out to be quite a small category, so it's not quantitatively very important, but are sort of in the tub instantly and drop out. And then the majority of the water in the tub is the water that was there in the past. They're people who've published in the past, they're publishing now, and they're publishing in the future. And we can try to think about raising the temperature of those people by, say, applying some heat to the tub to make them more interdisciplinary. So what's happening to interdisciplinarity over time? Well, it's going up. And, this is sort of a, 40 plus year perspective. There's something of a stagnation in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but it's, there's a quite consistent and substantial increase in interdisciplinarity in biomedicine. What are the sizes of these stocks and flows? Well, probably not surprising. The continuers, the people who've published in the past and are publishing now and publishing in the future and or remaining in the tub, constitute the majority of the, people. There are people who are entering the tub, entering the workforce. And then there are in yellow, and then there are people who are exiting in red. And those two groups, obviously the flows tend to be much smaller than the stock, but it is worth noting that the entrants are larger than the exiters, and that's why, if you look at the figure, the size of the population has grown quite substantially over time. So if you look at so what I'm going to try to do is now sort of break down where the change in overall interdisciplinarity is coming from. So the first group are the continuers, and because this is the majority of the population, the majority of the people in the tub, they track the overall level of interdisciplinarity quite closely. If you look at the people who are exiting the tub, or the one-timers who just sort of publish in 1 year and then disappear, they're much more noisy. These are much smaller groups. So that's why these are very jagged series. But what you can see is quite clear. They track the overall level of interdisciplinarity quite closely, albeit with a lot of noise. What's sort of striking and is that if you look at the entrance to the tub, the new people flowing into the system, they're actually less interdisciplinary quite consistently. This is a bit of a data artifact on the far right. The entrants are consistently less interdisciplinary than the people who are active at a point. And this is kind of a crazy thing if you think about it. We're essentially trying to raise the temperature of the water in the tub while putting colder water into the tub than the water that's already there, right? And so the way we're able to raise the temperature of the water in the tub is by basically making the continuers, the people who are already in the tub, making them more interdisciplinary. And we saw that a number of slides back in the blue and red slide. The initially disciplinary researchers do become more interdisciplinary as their careers progress, but they're sort of not the people who are best set up to be doing this interdisciplinary research, as we show in one of the tables in the paper. And there's a long tradition of research that suggests that people are most innovative at the beginning of their careers. And so it's sort of ironic that the new people entering the system are the ones who are least interdisciplinary or less interdisciplinary than the people who are already there. So I started out, with this slide saying, are interdisciplinary researchers, filling the gaps, or are they falling through the cracks? And this was motivated by this labor economic idea that we had, that if you're doing important work, you're filling the gaps in the knowledge, you should not be falling through the cracks. And as you can see, that was our working title for this project. The final conclusion is that maybe interdisciplinary researchers are filling the gaps, and despite that, they're falling through the cracks because of market failures. And that's really the thing that I think we as a community need to be thinking about and addressing.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, you're, the changes in or interest in interdisciplinarity across the career stage, reminding me of some work out of George Washington University by Trudy Mallinson, Guy Latricchiano, and some others, where they measured different motivators and threats towards collaboration throughout the career stage, finding that there was interest across the career stage, but early in the career stage, that motivation was towards sharing a common goal, and that was the reason for collaboration. And as you move to later stages in your career, it becomes more about a collective purpose and kind of training the next generation. So yeah, thank you. So I wonder, we see these kind of trends of disciplinarians and interdisciplinarians sort of I don't want to have a play on words of convergence, but converging towards like a median of interdisciplinarity throughout their careers. I wonder if you just might have some thoughts about should we focus our efforts towards maybe finding ways to support interdisciplinarity in disciplinarians earlier in their career, or maybe should we focus on strategies so that interdisciplinarians from the start of their career can sustain that better as they progress through.
These are great questions. I mean, there are a bunch of layers in the questions, Cory. So I mean, I think it is. I mean, for better or worse, and no one's giving or if they plan to, they haven't given me my magic wand yet. I mean, I think there is a reality that going back to the first part of your question, that that universities and the research enterprise is largely organized around departments rather than around questions and problems. And right, so this is sort of like if you want to progress through your career, you need to sort of go through those departmental logic, but that may not be what's best for solving larger problems. I think the second part of your question is sort of how how we should be supporting interdisciplinary researchers. And I think we certainly, I mean, people who've been trained as researchers have a huge amount of human capital that they have built up, and we've done work pointing out how much of that is supported by taxpayer money, right? So we certainly have an incentive not to to make the most out of the people that we're training, but across the career. But I think what we've tried to point out is that at the very beginning of the career, for everyone, there's a huge amount of exit from the system, at least from this particular publishing research system, and that does look like a particular point that we want to be thinking about and trying to address.
Thanks, Bruce. And I have one question from the chat. I have your paper that you published about slow convergence that you discussed today. I have it up, and so I know you actually addressed this at the very beginning of the paper, but perhaps could you tell us how you think of or you define interdisciplinarity?
Yeah, no, that's great. So I mean, there are a million ways of defining interdisciplinarity, and we've tried a variety of different measures. In this paper, on the degree recipient side, we've looked in some cases at do I combine multiple research fields? We've also coded up each of the articles in PubMed with how interdisciplinary they are based on their citation patterns, and the journals and fields that they're published in. So we've developed a bunch of measures to try to quantify interdisciplinarity. And I'm happy to talk about some of that if it's useful.
Yeah, and I know Dr. Peterson talks about this in some of his papers as well, these, very technical definitions. We'll just maybe address a couple more questions in the chat. Dr. Stephen Fior, who is also, I believe, doing a talk on convergence upcoming very soon, so you could check that out. He said the reason the supply and demand idea does not fit with interdisciplinary researchers is that it's not taking into account the systemic problem of traditional departmental structures and cultures. I think that's what you were saying, Bruce. Yeah. And is that what you mean by market failures?
Yeah, I think I think that is one component of it. I don't want to say that is the sole thing, but yes, I mean, I think there's journals look for a paper that like it just in funders look for particular types of things, and I do this too. When we try to hire someone, the first thing we do is we try to find a box that we can put them in. And if you don't fit in a box, we say, well, you couldn't teach this course, you can't train, which is exactly the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. But all of all of those incentives create a particular, a particular set of structures, including the department structure. So yes, absolutely, including but not limited to.
Yeah, and I think these are things at the department level, in the research lab team level, at the funders level. These are all things we are trying to think through right now. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. There's a couple more questions in the chat if you maybe want to address, Bruce. Otherwise, we can also get to them at the end as well. Okay, so thank you, Bruce. Up next is Dr. Alex Peterson joining us from UC Merced, and he's going to talk about a curious case of the convergence shortcut.
All right, hi everybody. Indeed, I'm Alex Peterson from the Management of Complex Systems Department at the University of California, Merced, and it's a real honor and privilege today to be able to share our work on convergence. So let's get started with some background on convergence. So convergence science was defined as in the seminal National Academies report as the coming together of insights and approaches from originally distinct fields to provide creative solutions to the most difficult problems, thinking beyond usual paradigms informed by many perspectives instead of few. From this, we adopt a definition of convergence as the product of three components, which together yield a transdisciplinary research model for tackling boundary-spanning grand challenges by integrating diverse disciplines as well as industrial sectors beyond academia. Against this backdrop, today I'll showcase a framework for measuring and evaluating convergence at the publication level. Our goal is to analyze research according to its social components, defined by the disciplinary pedigree of the team members, in addition to its conceptual components defined by article keywords. These complementary dimensions are important to distinguish because while keywords represent the research problem itself, disciplinary boundaries reflect the expertise applied to that problem. Moreover, we also aim to assess the extent to which research combines originally distinct components, represented by icons of different colors, as opposed to piecemeal variants. Building upon that distinction, I will present two sets of results. First, we will analyze the relative frequency of three progressive modes of convergence, in particular, the polymathic mode, where only distinct concepts are integrated, the cross-disciplinary mode, where only distinct disciplines are integrated, and the full convergence mode featuring cross-domain integration across both dimensions. And second, we'll evaluate the degree of alignment between the social and conceptual dimensions as an indicator of strategic team assembly. In both approaches, we'll encounter a phenomena we call the convergence shortcut, where scholars integrate diverse concepts without integrating diverse disciplines, which we believe reflects an unintended consequence of competitiveness spurred by flagship funding initiatives. Against that backdrop, now let me describe the objective of our measurement framework. Our first objective is to develop a granular representation of topics, methods, and equipment that scholars combine to address the overarching target domain, such as climate change or the human brain, or any other such complex system. If the space of concept is well defined, then we can also tabulate the full space of conceptual combinations, which yields a weighted combinatorial representation of the target problem. This enables us to pinpoint specific forms of cross-domain integration present in individual research outcomes, even if they do not address all aspects of the target problem. Similarly, we also seek to identify the particular domains of expertise represented by the research team, and to then evaluate the degree to which the social and conceptual components align. As grand challenges often span multiple disciplines, this represents not only the difficulty of collaborating and communicating across disciplinary boundaries, but also the high cost of achieving full disciplinary representation. As a result, teams typically economize by including a subset of core disciplines most relevant to the specific research project, In such a scenario, one strategy to incorporate concepts and methods outside of one's formal domain of training is by way of expansive self-learning, which is the defining characteristic of polymaths. Indeed, the paradigm of self-learning has been accelerated by the internet, which may explain the increasing frequency of polymathic convergence, a paradigm that is likely to be further enhanced by the role of generative artificial intelligence tools, which are the ultimate polymaths, and may replace cross-disciplinary collaboration by an altogether new mode of cyborg convergence. In this way, our framework is useful for elucidating the structure-function relationship between the social and conceptual dimensions of research, and can provide a guidance on how to design teams that are best equipped to unlock specific grand challenges, in particular by identifying and correcting team problem misalignments. Okay, so now for some methodology. Besides identifying specific disciplines, we also need to differentiate between neighboring and originally distinct disciplines, since our objective is to identify research that integrates distant domains, thereby embodying the intrepid mission of convergence. To this end, we leverage hierarchical ontologies in order to define a distance between any two locations in the relational tree. At the top level, denoted by L1 here, are the distinct domains such as the natural and social sciences, which then splinter into neighboring subdomains. In this way, the relative distance between any two disciplines can be described as neighboring or distant. Shown here are samples from the top two levels of the ontologies we used. On the left is the classification of instructional program ontology, or SIP for short, which we use to classify academic departments. And on the right is a snapshot of the medical subject heading ontology, or MESH for short, which organizes article-level keywords. Each of these ontologies is comprised of thousands of well-defined entities that are organized in a tree-like network. This zoom-in provides an idea of the increasing degree of specificity at increasing ontology levels. Importantly, the hierarchical structure facilitates mapping a very specific term at high levels to its parent term at the L1 level, in order to homogenize entities located at different levels of the ontology. Okay, so now a bit of the specifics on our data and metrics. We applied this framework to the human brain science ecosystem, or HBS for short. One reason to focus on HBS were the multi-billion-dollar funding initiatives launched globally around 2013 to address the grand challenge of understanding the human brain's structure-function relationship. In the US, the project was called the Brain Initiative, and in the EU, it was called the Human Brain Project. Meanwhile, China and Japan also joined the race with their own mega projects. HBS also features the boundary-spanning integration of concepts and methods from diverse fields such as neurobiology, public health, biomedical imaging, and informatics. And since the brain challenge does not impose a hierarchical structure among those disciplines, a most natural path to success may be a transdisciplinary approach. With this in mind, we reconstructed the HBS ecosystem by collecting 650,000 articles from 9,000 Scopus author profiles spanning over a half-century. Shown on the left is a visualization of the collaboration network, highlighting the convergence nexus that emerged between scholars from originally distinct domains. And on the right is a word cloud highlighting brain science mesh terms sized proportional to their frequency.
To analyze both dimensions simultaneously, we employed the following metrics. First, we identified the article's conceptual composition by tabulating the mesh terms into subject areas, represented by the SA vector shown for two example publications. The first is monotopic in that all concepts belong to the SA1, and hence the vector with elements 3, 0, 0, 0. The second instance features a cross-topic paper featuring essays 1, 2, and 4. Second, we identified the article's disciplinary composition, represented by the CIP vector, by tabulating the department affiliations of the co-authors. Our example shows a monodisciplinary team in one instance, along with a cross-disciplinary team in the other. Based upon these count vectors, we then calculate a Blau-like diversity index that accounts for the concentration and categorical diversity of the counts across the different domains. Hence, the monodomain vector maps onto the minimum value of 0, whereas the cross-domain vectors map onto larger values that are upper bounded by unity. Finally, we quantify team problem alignment by way of the cosine similarity metric, which is the inner product between the SA and CIP vectors. Shown at the bottom are two example alignments. The first is polymathic configuration, in which the conceptual space extends beyond the core expertise of the team. This publication achieves a moderate alignment score of 0.58. The second example represents a fully convergent configuration, in which both the conceptual and the social domains span distinct boundaries, and moreover, since each concept that the publication addresses is matched by a scholar with expertise in that subject area, then this publication achieves a relatively high alignment score of 0.87.
Okay, so finally for some results. First, regarding the frequency and impact of convergence in human brain research, and second, regarding the frequency and impact of team problem alignment. We can begin by applying the diversity metric I just described to each article in the HBS sample. This comparison assesses whether social and conceptual convergence follow a shared pattern, which if true would suggest they simply represent two sides of the same coin. Shown here are historical trends for conceptual and social diversity, reported as the percent difference from their intertemporal average, where larger values correspond to higher levels of cross-domain integration. Clearly, conceptual diversity has been on the persistent rise since the 1990s, whereas social diversity has been relatively flat over that same period. These different modes provide a first demonstration of the convergence shortcut, where scholars increasingly integrate diverse concepts without fostering equivalent team diversity. This strategy is advantageous when team coordination costs are greater than expansive learning costs. Next, we aggregated publication data at the level of researcher careers, following a more rigorous econometric approach, including scholar fixed effects and other factors such as team size. This approach fosters identifying within career variation attributable to 4 distinct research modes. The first mode is monodomain research, which is our measurement baseline. The second mode is polymathic convergence, where monodisciplinary scholars integrate multiple subject areas. The third is cross-disciplinary convergence, where multidisciplinary teams concentrate on a single subject area. And finally, there is full convergence, featuring intrepid integration in both social and conceptual dimensions. We find that fully convergent research features a 16% higher citation rate than the monodisciplinary baseline, and also exceeds the partial polymathic and cross-disciplinary modes. These results are consistent with our companion study of the Human Genome Project, where cross-disciplinary research also featured a substantial citation premium above the monodisciplinary control group. Next, we measure the impact of human brain projects on the relative frequency of different convergence modes. Results indicate an increasing prevalence of 2 convergence modes lacking cross-disciplinary integration, accompanied by a 33% decline after the launch of those human brain projects in the full convergence mode, which we attribute to the launch of those initiatives. Now shifting to the question of team problem alignment. Shown here is the average amount of social conceptual alignment calculated annually across those 3 decades. First, note the overall decline in alignment, which is consistent with teams becoming increasingly polymathic, venturing into conceptual domains beyond their core domain of training. This may reflect a new scientific paradigm shift towards generalists who are able to extend their skill base by way of expansive self-learning. Nevertheless, we note an uptick in a few years leading up to the announcement of the human brain projects, followed by another decline. The timing of this burst supports the idea of the convergence shortcut, suggesting that this phenomena arises from the need to quickly assemble competitive teams, possibly by avoiding the social coordination costs necessary to achieve full team diversity and a general fear of missing out. And finally, to assess the impact of team problem alignment, we revisited the econometric modeling framework to model the citation impact. Results indicate an additional 3% citation boost for research featuring complete team problem alignment, which complements the 11% citation boost attributable to research featuring high conceptual convergence. Okay, so to conclude, building on the success of the genomics revolution that was sparked by the Human Genome Project of the 1990s, national funding agencies, who are key players shaping scientific agendas, have become increasingly keen to orient the scientific endeavor by way of grand challenges. This trend is most recently exemplified by flagship funding programs the world over that aim to unravel the structure-function relationship of the human brain, a quintessentially complex system. Our findings show that research featuring cross-domain integration is more impactful than similar research lacking integration. An effect is optimized when research features full convergence and a high degree of team problem alignment. Yet we also note the increasing prevalence of the polymathic mode corresponding to the convergence shortcut. Indeed, it will be interesting to see how the emerging paradigm of human AI teams will augment the need and demand for cross-disciplinary collaboration, as AI tools present a convenient avenue to access and harness knowledge outside of one's expertise, and may also accelerate the paradigm of expansive self-learning. And one final comment regarding the curious case of the convergence shortcut. Our analysis suggests that mega funding programs risk unintentionally promoting suboptimal team configurations, thereby undermining the potential for convergent research approaches to address grand challenges, and therefore calls for additional analysis and possibly policy adjustment. Thank you for your attention. First, a shout out to my co-author in all this work, Professor Yanis Pavlidis at the University of Houston, as well as the NSF for funding support. And a big thanks to our organizers today for this wonderful opportunity to share our work. Please see the first two articles here for the gritty details on what I presented, and our related work where we applied our framework to several other convergence zones, such as the affective and cognitive sciences, the genomics revolution, the entire biomedical enterprise, and also a thought piece on how all roads appear to be leading towards the coming age of cyborg convergence. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, it was really interesting, especially just following Bruce's talk and how he was talking about changes in interdisciplinarians versus disciplinarians over their career stage. And I was trying to, very quickly put together in my mind, like, how does that concept overlap with the concept you presented about, approaching convergence from a social discipline perspective versus a kind of a conceptual perspective, and maybe like how that overlays with these career timelines, or maybe early career stage interdisciplinarians kind of rooted in their departmental structure and, kind of you can more easily access, this social or discipline-based convergence research, which perhaps is limited. And then over time, as Bruce was saying, they gain more freedom. They can, work more conceptually. So I found that very interesting. I also thought wanted to know what your thoughts on it's, seemed like the data presented that, as you mentioned, generalist training could be very powerful. And I, of course, have my own biases, but, I think obviously fields like neuroscience evolved to kind of train people generally across different approaches within neuroscience. I think translational health science and translational research has also kind of got towards that. Did you find anything in your research that would speak towards that? Like more towards training generalists or people that can kind of approach entire, constructs in biology and biomedicine?
Not necessarily. I don't think we looked at that deep level of kind of the training mechanism, but I can kind of return to your point about institutional support, having kind of made kind of a cross-disciplinary mobility transition in my own career. And I would say it's kind of extremely important to think about not just the career side, but also the institutional support for such careers has to be, thought out carefully and, revisited, because institutional support for interdisciplinary can change with the winds. And I can, again, I can speak from experience in that, it may be kind of in the mind and in the mission at one moment, but then if leadership changes and economic environment changes, then very quickly there can be, I think, what Bruce was showing, kind of shifts in the amount of support and the climate for support of these really important kind of bridges that are connected. And I think it's also relevant to think about this, since we're talking about brain science. The human brain needs several years. I got a 4-year-old, several years to anneal, right, to kind of create those connections. And so we may not, and this may be part of that kind of race. The convergence shortcut may reflect the pressure cooker of these big missions may actually kind of create these unintended kind of propensities to look for shortcuts. So that's kind of a trade-off of these big mission type objectives. There tends to be a time constraint that maybe we have to think about how to address. So I don't know if that addressed your question, but that's certainly what I was thinking about when I was listening to Professor Weinberg.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yeah, and there's a bunch of questions in the chat and some kind of comments in the same vein. If you'd like to maybe address those. I do want to, maybe you could bring up Mela's question here, because it's something that Karen and I often think about here in the Combine program at NINDS, is the challenges of publications and I think it's kind of in the same line of what you're talking about, the need for institutional support. I think we really need, we've done a lot of thinking about authorship and credit assignment, and I think that is also kind of one of the barriers that we're trying to address for interdisciplinary researchers. And I think Mela had mentioned, like, it's not only a barrier from the credit assignment, reward and recognition process, but it just takes more work to get, people from distinct disciplines to be able to put this together in like a single product. Okay, just for time, we'll go ahead and move on to Dr. Sabrina Figueiredo. But yes, there's a number of questions for you in the chat, Dr. Peterson, if you want to reply to those, or we can try to also get to them at the end.
Wonderful. Can you all see my screen?
Yep, thank you.
Oh, perfect. So I'm Sabrina Figueiredo. I'm an assistant professor at George Washington University in the School of Medicine and Health Sciences, where I'm involved with the teaching in the doctoral program of translational health sciences, where we train the next generation in team science, complexity theory, and program theory. And in my talk today, I will explore principles of complexity. Also, I'll touch upon program theories. How can we use that to develop complex interventions? But throughout that journey from complexity to program theory, I will highlight the importance of team science in such context. And I will also share findings of how my team and I mapped interventions for addressing burnout, a complex problem among healthcare professionals working in a hospital setting. So the traditional approach for developing intervention entails the cycle that we have here. We first identify a health problem. We then search in the scientific literature, select an evidence-based intervention. We also need to determine the duration of that intervention to allow for sufficient change to take place and to be captured. And then we establish the measurement plan to capture that change over time. So this is a well-established approach for intervention selection, but my aim today is to expose you to a different paradigm, one that addresses the context and the needs of different key players. So in the cycle that I just mentioned of intervention selection, evidence-based interventions, they are informed by findings from systematic reviews and randomized controlled trials, owing to their evidence hierarchies as published by Sackett and collaborators over 20 years ago. So despite its predominance, the limitations of such study designs, they're becoming more recognized. So RCTs are designed to answer a question about the efficacy or effectiveness of an intervention. So they indicate the extent to which an intervention is better than the placebo treatment. On the other hand, RCTs and systematic reviews, they fail to incorporate patient values and the complexities of the system around those patients. So RCTs, to speak in a different language, they use a reductionist approach in which there is a linear association between the independent variable and the intended outcome, also expressed as a simple cause and effect relationship. So I'd like us to reflect a bit further and consider the implementation of intervention X, which is widely supported by strong evidence from systematic reviews, and will implement intervention X in hospital A and hospital B to address the same exact problem. After 6 months, we do our measurements, and finding indicates that intervention X is effective in hospital A, but no changes were observed in hospital B. So how can we explain such contrasting results? And the answer to that is simple. Healthcare and healthcare teams are complex, what we also call a complex adaptive system. And as such, positive outcomes in one location may not work in the same way elsewhere without local adjustments. And that's where team science comes in to help with the local adjustments. By definition, a complex adaptive system refers to the concept of viewing the healthcare system not as an isolated part, but a network of interconnected parts, meaning the patients, providers, institutions, researchers, payers, and policies. And the interactions between those components can produce unpredictable and emergent behaviors. And that requires a more holistic approach to understand and manage change rather than relying on that simple cause and effect linear model. So complexity science has been introduced in healthcare as a theoretical framework to better understand complex problems and conditions with multiple causes. And in a similar fashion, the interdisciplinary healthcare teams can also be viewed as complex adaptive systems, or in short, CAS, by focusing on the interaction between team members. So within these complex systems, we do face complex problems which cannot be solved with simple solutions or isolated interventions because complex problems have multiple causes. And that's why intervention X may work in hospital A, but not in hospital B. So the management of complex conditions require an approach that also considers the context that mediate successful outcomes in complex adaptive systems. And to address those problems, the intervention selection cycle that I just mentioned must be expanded and include a couple of additional phases, such as a situational analysis, as well as the engagement of stakeholders as early as possible. And these approaches will allow for understanding the interactions that exist in all these different contexts and the needs of the relevant parties. So, a key feature of this process is that the intervention to address a complex problem is developed through collaboration of groups of experts. So, to effectively address a complex problem, it is crucial to engage individuals from diverse backgrounds and expertise. The collaboration fosters innovation and diverse insights, and that will enable us to address the different causes of the complex problems. And by incorporating multiple perspectives, the solutions can be developed the solutions developed will account for the context of the system where the problem resides. So, in short, what I'm trying to say is that to solve complex problems in complex systems, we must collaborate. So, in other words, we need to have a strong team science approach. And now I would like to provide a more concrete example through one of my works on burnout in healthcare professionals. And the team that like the two papers that I'm including here, you can see in the bottom, it was composed by a group of epidemiologists, psychologists, and hospital chaplains. So the epidemiologist and the psychologist, we're both at George Washington University, and the hospital chaplains, they are at Children's National Hospital, partners with GW, and the hospital chaplains, they are responsible for developing interventions to help with the well-being of the hospital staff. So, by looking at this linear reductionist approach, if we look at the findings of systematic reviews published in the last decade about interventions to mitigate burnout, we see that the results are contradictory. So, such interventions can target either the individual or the organization, the healthcare organization. And results show that some authors, they suggest that both intervention types are effective. Others will suggest that the organization tailored interventions are more effective, whereas other groups of authors will say that those types of interventions must be combined. And there are other authors who say that regardless of the type of the intervention, the effects are short lived. So, as you can see, the systematic reviews shed some light on whether interventions are effective. However, they don't give us any indication of how these effective interventions work and what are the specific elements to drive burnout reduction. So, to address this gap, we proposed the adoption of a realist review because by understanding how interventions work, we can then adapt that active ingredient to different healthcare settings. So, to move away from this linear causal effect approach, we conducted this realist review that follows a theory-guided approach for understanding the complexities of an intervention and generating explanation about what works, for whom, and in what circumstances they work. So initially published by Pawson and collaborators, this methodology of a realist review explores the relationship of the context in which the intervention is delivered, the internal intervention mechanism that leads to change, and the outcomes produced by the intervention. Here we have the research questions of our realist review that was registered at Prospero, and we aim to understand how burnout interventions work in different hospital units for a diverse group of qualified healthcare professionals. The image here displays the methodology overview that we followed, and you can see the entire image in the paper that I cited in our realist review. And the methodology has 5 main stages. And more specifically, in stage 1 at the top, stakeholders define the theories to be reviewed. So that's the first stage. And then from 2 to 5, we follow the regular review methodology with search, study selection, data synthesis, and dissemination and implementation. But most important, I would like to emphasize here is that how the team gets together in stage 1 and stage 5 to first define the scope, and then at stage 5 to make actionable recommendations. Now going briefly about each of these phases, in stage 1, so we are a group of researchers, psychologists, and hospital chaplains. We met to define the variables of interest and prioritize on existing theories supporting burnout. And we produce this output here that triangulates in the 3rd column the context, in the 4th column the mechanisms, and in the 5th column the outcomes of 5 different theories that aim to explain the mechanisms for burnout reduction. During the 2nd stage of this review, we searched 3 databases, and included were publications in English with interventions to reduce burnout of healthcare workers in a hospital setting, and excluded were interventions focusing on the organization, like the healthcare system, also including a student or a resident, or research questions related to COVID-19. In stage 3, we moved from identifying 632 titles after removing duplicates and articles that were not relevant to our search strategy. We end up with 49 peer-reviewed articles that were included in this review. Now, in stage 4, we synthesized our findings. The figure here on the left, the blue pie chart, maps the current burnout interventions targeting healthcare professionals working in hospital settings, and the pink pie chart presents the study designs used to test burnout interventions. But what I would like to focus on, it's actually this table here, where we can see that the interventions can be categorized into mind, body, and soul domains. But instead of saying if those interventions are effective and showing the extent to which they are effective, we also demonstrate the circumstances that are needed to activate the mechanism of the intervention. So, for example, under the mind domain, mindfulness strategies, which are well established in the literature to be effective in those circumstances, yes, they can be effective if protected time is in place. Otherwise, they will not be effective. And then we go back to that notion of why an intervention works in setting A, but not in setting B. In addition, we found that interventions offered outside of working hours are likely to fail. Another circumstance that we found is that interventions that include only knowledge gains are also not effective in reducing burnout. So the interventions also must include um, gaining in skills and this idea of how we actually perceive burnout. So, well, what I'm trying to say here, I guess my message is pretty clear at this point, is that one size doesn't fit all when dealing with complex conditions in complex systems. So, by understanding what works or the active ingredient of an intervention, which is similar to any medication, like if you look into the ingredients of any medication, we will see there is one active ingredient combined with some other ingredients to help with digestion or other aspects, but there is one active ingredient. And then we must find out what that ingredient is so we be able to tailor that. And that tailoring is possible when we have a team together to account for different perspectives. Now, how do we move from understanding all those circumstances, but actually being hands on and implementing those complex interventions? Well, interventions, they are more likely to succeed if they are informed by theories. So to support our intervention, we will use program theory, also known as theory of changes, or many people will call it by how we actually graph and visually display this theory, and that's what we call the logic model. But the science to it, it's actually called program theory. So this theory explains the how and why an intervention is expected to work in different contexts. So this theory includes three components, which are activities and inputs, also the outcomes and the outputs. And connecting both, we have the mechanisms through which the intended outcomes are achieved. So as complex interventions take into account the different and diverse causes of a complex condition, its development and implementation also requires collaboration among researchers, practitioners, patients. And according to program theory, before proposing any type of intervention, one must assess the circumstances around the local problem and understand the central mechanisms by which change comes about for the different stakeholders. And we can do that through a needs assessment or a situational analysis. And that's where we currently are in our project. We finished that review and we're doing a needs assessment at the GW Hospital to understand the needs of our population to then tailor that intervention to their needs. So identifying the key player, like who are they and their needs is crucial. Once we do that, then the next step is to identify at a very granular level the mechanisms by which the intervention will actually lead to my intended outcome, in this case, burnout reduction. I cannot make the assumption that because I implement this wonderful intervention that I will get there. In this phase, I also need to have a clear picture of what needs to be done for change to take place. So let's hypothesize here in this example that I have that we created this program, the 1 apple a day to keep the doctor at bay. And we hypothesize that this program will improve health outcomes. However, if we only give the apples away, changes will not take place. So in this case, an effective intervention requires that participants eat the apple, which requires that apples be delivered to them. And this will trigger a cascade of events. So once we understand this outcome chain, we then may realize that for the Apple a Day program, for example, to be effective, we may need to use multiple reminders to remind the participants to eat the apple. And to consider team science in light of complex interventions, it's important to have this notion that the success of complex interventions hangs on close collaboration and communication among diverse teams, which requires bringing together expertise from various domains to address the different challenges that we face. And it's important to keep in context that patients are integral parts to the success of the intervention. And the earlier we can engage with them, the better. And lastly, the takeaways from today is that this presentation, I hope, provide insights into navigating complex systems in healthcare and push you to this to embracing a different paradigm. And by embracing complexity, we can develop better interventions for a more fulfilling and effective professional life. And understanding and explaining what works for whom and in what circumstances. Most importantly, implementing complex interventions, it's only possible through collaboration among a diverse team.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think kind of a duplicative benefit for a lot of us, I think, learning about both your approaches to complex interventions in complex science, but also how we can all maybe learn from your research and mitigate burnout in our own professional lives. So look forward to, the progress of that project. One of the things that stood out to me, and I think is very powerful about program theories, it allows you to not only design your research, but also use it for evaluation of your implementation. Um, I'm wondering if, you could speak a bit more to how to align, the things you're doing to the outcomes that you intend to, achieve, and how you can maybe demonstrate that. I know you mentioned the logic model is one way.
Yeah, so when developing this program theory, specifically the outcome chain, you go through a sequence of outcomes, right? And that sequence of outcomes must also be mapped, like in any intervention. Each outcome must be aligned with a measurement plan that is able to capture the changes related to that specific outcome. So, like, let's say in that outcome chain that I gave as an example, we need to measure, are the apples being delivered? Are the apples being eaten? Are the intermediate biomarkers changing? Is health like your last most, like the most distal outcome, is that being changed as well? So you need outcomes in all those different levels to ensure that actually your sequence of event is in fact true, because it is possible that you have that sequence of events, but then the apples are not being eaten, and you still like at the end noticing that health is being improved. So by doing that, have a measurement mechanism in place for each level of the outcomes that you established, you can ascertain if the theory that you developed is in fact true, and if not, what is a parallel mechanism that might be taking place that helps to explain the change. So I think measurement in itself is a science, a huge and important science. Whenever we are developing interventions, either simple interventions or complex interventions, they require careful consideration, because not only we need to have the adequate measures to capture what we are delivering, but also when are we going to measure? Otherwise, we may not capture change, right? If I measure too soon or too late, I may miss the change.
So we definitely should have some statisticians and maybe implementation scientists on our interdisciplinary teams.
Absolutely. And not only that, but also it's important to measure what is valuable for, like, let's say, patients, right? In this notion of RCTs, since I talked about them, um, we have this large discussion in measuring what's most profitable, or like what will show the largest confidence interval of a change. But are we measuring what's important to patients? Are we measuring what's important to the other teams, to the other members of the team? So having that conversation early, it's also important.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sabrina. Yeah, I think early and often for stakeholder engagement is critical to sustained interventions. Okay, there's I think a question in the chat from Ana Morales. Maybe you can get to that one. But otherwise, we'll turn it over to Dr. Kelvin Quinones Lara-Quinte to take us home today and discuss bridging science and medicine.
Hey, you can see the slides?
Yep, you're good.
All right. Hola, I'm Kelvin. Join me as we talk about bridging science and medicine. So for this talk, I'll first talk about my personal journey as a physician scientist. Second, the research that I'm currently doing on social behaviors and the brain. And then finally, I'm going to try and extract some insights of what my training provided so that we can use it to better connect science and medicine. So when I first started my MD PhD journey, I was often asked, why would I want to put myself through both medical school and a PhD program? Why not just choose one path? But that is exactly what I want to talk about today. Why we need to people that navigate both worlds. And more importantly, how we can all work together to bridge the gap between the scientific discovery and patient care. So about my path. I did my MD PhD at the University of Puerto Rico, and the goal was to set out to research human diseases. The medical degree came in handy for knowing what's known about the disease, but the PhD then provided tools to ask questions that have never been asked before and attempt to answer them as well. I trained with Greg Quirk, and I studied fear conditioning and extinction in systems neuroscience. And this started this passion of mine now to try and go into the mind and the brain. And in order to do that, I then was fortunate to be selected to go to NYU to join the research track of the psychiatry residency. And there I also joined Rob Fromke's lab, who I'm working with at the moment. So I was splitting my time between the clinic, the wards, and the lab. So for the clinical part, I train at Bellevue, at the VA, and at the NYU hospital. And this at the same time that I was doing research, and this dual perspective was very eye-opening. I worked with patients across the entire spectrum of mental disorders. And after treating hundreds of patients, I found a common thread, that sort of intuition about a symptom that weighed very heavy in most patients. And the symptom is social dysfunction, and it manifests in different ways. A couple of examples. So I remember a boy on the pediatric psych ward who had severe autism. He was brilliant with numbers, but could not make eye contact. During the group activities, he was able to solve very complex puzzles, but couldn't share his excitement with others, and that caused deep frustration in him. Other patients suffering from schizophrenia also feature social dysfunctions, particularly in the negative symptoms. I remember one woman who was formerly a concert pianist. Positive symptoms were pretty controlled with medication, but she's lost all interest in performing with other people and connecting with her fellow musicians. Same goes for major depressive disorder, where I saw a lot of patients in the outpatient clinic. And one patient described it very well. He said, it's not that it's not that just like feeling sad, it's the color has drained from relationships. He said that he should care about connectings, but then he just can't, he doesn't actually want to. And then there are other psychiatric disorders, as you can see in the DSM-5, you can look for it, and they mention that there's social dysfunctionality of them in them. But these are diagnoses. What are treatments? What are interventions that are based on sociality that are effective? So, of course, medications are very effective for people that have severe mental disorders or just not severe. Medications are critical, right? If somebody with anxiety takes a medication, then they're able to then go and participate in therapy and get better. Also, psychosocial interventions are very helpful. Just removing stressors and fulfilling basic needs, it goes a long way. But there is a lot of value in talk therapy and group therapy, right? They're sometimes as effective as medications. They also work both together. And I believe there's a lot to tease about this talk therapy and the group therapy, where you see another person. In the individual therapy component, you just see your therapist in a very calm demeanor manner, and you learn from them, right? But also in group therapy, where a leader then takes patients and then they process their symptoms, and they learn from each other. So given that we don't know a lot about how therapy and group therapy works, I also thought that this might be a good entry into trying to understand how these treatment works and what is happening at the neural level. And yep, how the brain is changing with therapy. So back to my research training, I joined NYU and I'm working with the lab of Rob Fromke. which he's exploring the neurobiology of social behaviors, among other things. And it so happens that he is part of the Brain Initiative U19 Team Science cohort that is focused on oxytocin, which is a neuropeptide, and it's believed to modulate social interactions with a specific context, our environment. So let's talk a little bit about oxytocin. It has two paths. So back in the 1900s, it was shown that it was a substance from the pituitary that caused uterine contractions in animals, and that was quickly adapted by obstetricians to help patients with dystocia, patients that had protracted labor, and also postpartum bleeding. It was very good for treating those patients. And then in middle of the century, we were able to synthesize it chemically so we can just administer it. But there's another role that came in later, where in the 1990s, studies show that oxytocin play a crucial role in pair bonding, particularly in prairie voles, a rodent model. And then that was tried for different populations, patient populations that had social dysfunction. However, the results were mixed. So to better understand these mixed models, we then proceeded to go back to the animal model, and study the interactions between them. So we do this with mice. Mice depend on other mice for survival. They have complex social structures, kind of like humans. So in the lab, we use parental care. This is a video where you can see a parent, retrieves a stray pup out of the wonder nest and puts it back into the nest for food, for protection, and for warmth. But what if you have, we call them virgins, animals that have not given birth, exposed to this, to the pups? Would they actually go and take care of them even though they have not given birth by themselves? Would they learn to take care of pups if they're exposed to a mom with pups as well? So we can test this quite easily by just having a litter of pups and taking one of them, putting it away from the nest, and seeing what the animal would do. So if we take moms or dams, and we just test how many pups they'll retrieve, when we take them away, they bring back almost all of them. If we have virgin animals that again have not given birth, and we test and we co-house with a mom with pups for less than 12 hours, they do some retrieval, but not a lot. But after 3 days, they do as well as the moms, which is pretty interesting. There's some sort of like learning curve that is happening in the time, and that really suggests a learning from this behavior. But we wanted to know if this is something that the unexperienced animal is looking at the mom taking care of the pups and doing it, and not any other thing about like mom trying to get the virgin to do it. So then we ask our question about what would happen if you take out the physical contact with the mom and the pups. So what if we separate them with a barrier? Yeah, here we control the environment, and we have the virgin enclosed, able to see, smell, and hear the other side of the chamber. And we do this for 4 days, where we have the mom retrieve the pups in front of her. So here, as you can see in this graph, we do it for 4 days and we test the retrieval. And here in the dotted gray is no barrier. So virgins that were not in the barrier were able to retrieve pups. But if you put a transparent barrier, those virgins retrieve as well. So the physical contact is not needed. It's just observation-wise. Interestingly, if you knock down the oxytocinergic receptor in the virgin mice, they don't do as well. And if you put a dark barrier, basically they cannot see the other side, they do not learn at all, basically, compared to the other two groups. So that led us to the question, like, is this information being transmitted by the vision system of mice? Is it key, is relevant? for that learning of how to do the pulp retrieval. So in order to answer the question, we decided to have the animal's head fixed and look at a movie, at a TV. And the TV had no sound, it just had the video of the mom retrieval. And now we're expanding on this. I can go on for a while. I just want to show you a brief snippet now that we have this technology. We were able to then interrogate different regions of the brain and test with different types of videos. So here, for example, this responses from the superior colliculus, which is a region in the brain that projects to the PVN, which houses the oxytocinergic neurons. And there are different responses to different videos. So the main idea now is to decode how social awareness is encoded in these visual circuits. So now for some actionable suggestions for bridging science and medicine. So let me take you back to an analogy that I think I like a lot. Picture two people in a dark room, each holding a flashlight, right? One is a scientist and one is a clinician. But when they shine the light in different directions, they illuminate different spaces. And in this analogy, the flashlights are the interest of the things that they do. It's not limited to this, but there's a lot of what they do in these ray of lights. But when they point the beams at the same target, the light becomes stronger and the view becomes clearer. That's basically what we need in medicine in order to advance it, right? We need to align efforts between researchers and clinicians. And sometimes these connections lead to unexpected discoveries. Here are just a couple, just four actually. From the bench to the bedside, basically from the scientists to the clinicians. You have examples of the discovery of dopamine as a reinforcer, like critical for learning, particularly emotional memories, right? But also, you from the bench, you have the discovery that the hippocampus is a memory player and is very important for episodic memory. It just also happens that these two projects have been Brain Initiative funded. But also, the findings go the other way, from the bedside to the bench. For example, deep brain stimulation was started by neurosurgeons trying to control motor movements, and now it's just expanded into multiple basic science questions about how stimulation works in the brain, and also just neuroanatomical functioning, where we first learned about functional neuroanatomy after examining patients that came in with strokes or brain masses. That was like their first entry into knowing what parts of the brain do. Another thing is to keep in mind is that serendipity will happen. Here are three classic examples from psychiatry, where the first one, chlorpromazine, a first effective antipsychotic, was developed as an anesthetic. During surgery, doctors noticed a unique calming effect on agitated patients, and this accidental observation just revolutionized the treatment of schizophrenia. Lithium was actually discovered twice for their mood stabilizing properties. The first in 1890s, then again in 1940s, where Australian psychiatrist was actually studying lithium toxicity in guinea pigs and then noticed that they're very calm. And now it's currently the gold standard for treatment of bipolar disorder. And it also works for depressive disorders as well. Another one, it's imipramine, which was the first antidepressant, which was tried as an antipsychotic first, but then the clinicians saw the marked improvement in mood symptoms, and then it was then re-employed as an antidepressant. So here are some things that came to mind about if you are a scientist. You can establish rapport with clinicians in your field of interest, and not necessarily they have to be physicians, right? There's a lot of value of people that are actively seeing patients, like nurses, social workers, and therapists, right? Which basically provide you a lot of insight on what is happening out there in the medical realms. Another thing is to attend department-wide grand rounds. They're not just for medical staff. And if you see something that resonates with you in the ground rounds, they usually have ways to contact the speakers, so you can just shoot them an email and start a conversation. Another thing is that usually clinics and wards, they have interdisciplinary team meetings where multiple clinicians come together to discuss various facets of the clinical care. And if you're able to access them, it's a really good window in terms of understanding the multiple parts of the clinical medical system and getting, again, some insights on your preferred part of science. If you are into neurology, you can attend neurology rounds, but they also become very specialized. It could be strokes. It could just also be mood disorders. It's very nuanced. And for those in medicine, if you read a paper, don't hesitate to connect with researchers. When you read a paper, really, you can email the corresponding author. I can tell you from experience that we love hearing from people who read our work and curious about it. There's also a lot of value in attending specialty clinical meetings because usually scientists attend those too and give talks. And this is for everyone. It's critical, in my opinion, to keep a list of questions and observations that puzzle you. I personally keep mine on my phone. And they're not random thoughts. I mean, they're in a way, they're intuitions. And I wanted to actually end with a thought of intuition by Thomas Kuhn, whose essay on structures and scientific revolutions. In here, he argues that scientific breakthroughs often begin in intuition. It's a nagging feeling that something deserves a deeper investigation. And that intuition is not random. It comes from observation, from conversation, from experience. Is basically your large language model by itself being trained and trying to let you know that there's something that should be explored. And yeah, that's our challenge, but that's also our opportunity. By strengthening the bridges between science and medicine, we can accelerate discovery and improve patient care. So each of us, we work primarily at the bench or the bedside, we have a role to play. Before I take questions, I want to express my gratitude to my colleagues at NYU, our funding sources, and Cory, Karen, and Pascal for organizing this session, and to all of you for your attention. I'm now happy to hear your thoughts and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Calvin. I love that you ended with Thomas Kuhn. This is probably well, I didn't give a presentation today, but usually when I do, it has some Thomas Kuhn in it. So I always appreciate the philosophy of science. Yeah. It was quite fascinating in your talk, just, thinking about something. I don't want to be pejorative as I say it's simple, but about this concept of the mom bringing the pups, and thinking about it at first, and as you're talking, I'm like, okay, now we have to bring in people that are experts in vision circuits and hormones and all these things. It's really I think demonstrated to solve problems in science, it really takes just so many different people to come together and agree on a common purpose. The MD PhD model is interesting because obviously it's inherently interdisciplinary, and poised to kind of build bridges between medicine and biological sciences. I wonder if you might have any thoughts on aspects of the MD PhD program and model that we could take or generalize towards all scientists or physicians to further create that interdisciplinarity.
Yeah, definitely. There's a strong push I've seen recently on the PhD programs to offer courses that are clinically relevant, and there are a lot that you actually train for confidentiality and get some sense of what talking to a patient ensures, and then they actually go and talk to the people that are suffering from diseases that particularly students in biomedical programs could benefit a lot, right? Because they are noticing what is one of the applicabilities, one of the things that are the outcomes of their work. So that is definitely something that I'm excited for. I see it at NYU a lot. A lot of medical students, they are very invested into trying to take courses that are research focused, and vice versa as well. So definitely a shift that I've been seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think, it definitely, complements, Alex's research demonstrating, this trend towards generalization and Bruce's data that showed that, interdisciplinarity is increasing overall. I wonder if I just might pose to the entire panel, whoever may be of interest in responding, in our last few minutes here. Two questions, but I'll only give one at a time, but they're kind of related. The first question is, a lot of the conversations today were about, the need for, these different perspectives to be together and to have a common vision. I wonder if any of your experience or your research has spoke towards the characteristics of scientists or teams that successfully do convergence research, or maybe more pragmatically, like if you're looking to do convergence research, what should you be looking for in a team? Anybody have thoughts, or in your experiences, what have been the characteristics of the teams that you've worked on that have been able to successfully navigate complex research projects or conduct convergence research?
Oh, I can go ahead, Bruce.
No, Sabrina.
Okay, so I'll go like from the experience I have, in a sense that I first looked to have a team with the competencies that I need for that project. So, for example, the one I shared here today, I'm an epidemiologist by training, and a physical therapist doing research on burnout. So, I needed someone on my team with that background in psychology, right? But also then looked at to include the hospital chaplains, because they are the one delivering the interventions to healthcare professionals. So at first, that like my initial approach was to have the necessary background and expertise. Now, moving with that, once I think it's also important to acknowledge that people have different ways of working, different like individual characteristics, that you need to account for those as well in order for a team to be productive. And I think you identify, at least for me, I don't do that in a formal way where we get together and like, oh, I'm this type of person, I do things this way. It happens organically, but when working in teams, you need to be aware that different people work differently, and you need to find the common sense for that team to work well together. Like, who is going to be the leader? Who will delegate? Things like that. And one last thought is that, in hindsight, what I think it's missing from my team, which I'm addressing in this next phase of my project, is, and we talked about that in the comments, it's not only to have experts on the team, but one of the key experts is the patient, right? So we need that as well.
Thank you, Sabrina.
I was just going to say, yeah, very quickly, and maybe not quite as eloquently, but that we've done a little bit of work on the demographics, and I'll save you going through the whole chart. We find essentially no observable differences by gender, first gen, race, in terms of graduate students doing doing interdisciplinary research. I think we're somewhat surprised by that, but that's what came out. I would sort of maybe echoing at least broadly what Sabrina was saying. I think certainly there are huge costs to doing interdisciplinary research, right? I mean, when we've done interdisciplinary research, you discover that there are terms that you use that they have no clue what they mean, and even better, there are terms that you use and that they use that have completely different meanings in both of you. So you almost need a Google Translate to make the interact. So it's very costly, and people who can sort of handle that and be flexible and think about it in different ways, are super valuable.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Oh, go ahead, Alex. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, because it really manifestly occurred to me, and quite kind of maybe on a meta level, but this discussion today about convergence, we're speaking to an audience where you all are studying an organism or an organ that has solved this problem of integrating across different domains, communicating across different time scales, incorporating inputs from the environment and internally. So I think there's a lot of insights from this particular community on how to actually implement convergence in our social setting. But I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think the kind of the duality of neuroscience research, I think, is always what has drawn me to it, certainly. And I think, what you said, Bruce, about, kind of cross-disciplinary crosstalk is something, Karen and I, as co-leads of the Combine program, I come from a clinical and translational background, and she comes from more of a basic science background. We're both neuroscientists, but, you really have to sit down, as a team and be like, well, what did you really mean by this? Or, because sometimes, I could say something that maybe is, has a clinical bias versus fundamental bias, and even the undertones, let alone the actual definitions, can impact your team dynamics. So certainly having those intentional conversations is critical in convergent research.
And if
okay,
I may
well,
quickly,
please, yes, do.
Treat it like jazz. You improvise and you riff on the other, right? And it's yes and.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's good. I mean, it's certainly team science is still at its early stages, of maturity. And, we do have some best practices, but a lot of it is still emerging practices. And I think we need to think about that on teams as well, that, it's an iterative art as you learn to come together and sort through what can be very complex problems. Let me just check my Q&A here. Okay. All right. Well, we thank everybody for joining us today. And we thank our panelists for these very intriguing and insightful conversations. We look forward to everyone joining us again in the spring, where we'll have guests from all over different fields and different disciplines and different institutions come talk to us about how we can think about the design and evaluation of team science programs. So we'll get those emails out to you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you then. And the recording will be up in a day or two. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.